This is the U.S. Report with James Morrow.
Good evening and welcome to the program. Coming up tonight, Hezbollah terrorists caught sneaking in via the U.S.'s chaotic southern border? How many more are there? Jennie Taer brings us an exclusive report. Plus, the left media falls into an absolute meltdown over Trump's bloodbath comment. Plus, a new study shows that woke people are the least happy. Is anybody surprised? But first, do you want the good news or the bad news? Well, I'm a cheery guy, so let's start with the good news. Over the past 48 hours, the House Oversight Committee, that's the one investigating Joe Biden and his family and their alleged crimes and misdemeanors, nearly went into meltdown over evidence from a number of witnesses, including former Biden business partner Tony Bobulinski, detailing the various complicated ways Joe and Hunter were in business together, selling, it would appear, access to companies from China and other great friends of freedom of the world. And, well, now the bad news, at least bad news as far as I see it. Despite the mountain of testimony and evidence that was revealed, including bank checks, suspicious activity reports, emails, and confirmation from Bobulinski that Joe Biden was, in fact, the guy who Hunter was referring to when he talked about 10% for the big guy, Joe Biden is likely to skate and not be held to account for any of that. Because the American judicial system and the media that works hand in hand with it are more interested in trying to bankrupt Donald Trump for the crime of taking out loans and paying them back. Anyway, let's have a look at what happened in these hearings anyway, shall we? Have a listen to this. It's a little bit of Tony Bobulinski's opening statement.
We keep hearing from certain corners that our democracy is at risk and democracy is on the ballot in 24. Yet the same people preaching this mantra know better. They continue to lie directly to the American people without hesitation and remorse. I want to be crystal clear. From my direct personal experience and what I've subsequently come to learn, it is clear to me that Joe Biden was the brand being sold by the Biden family. His family's foreign influence peddling operation from China to Ukraine and elsewhere sold out to foreign actors who are seeking to gain influence and access to Joe Biden and the United States government.
And here's Jim Jordan quizzing Bobulinski about who the big guy was.
Mr. Bobulinski, who's the big guy? Joe Biden. Are you sure about that? Because when
Jordan, Joe Biden.
Sure? You're sure?
I'm 1,000% sure.
Because when Hunter Biden did his deposition under oath, he said, I don't know who it is, even though he was copied on an email that said H will hold 10% for the big guy. You sure it's the big guy is Joe Biden?
1,000%. And there's other text messages that back that up, that the brave whistleblowers, Shapley and Ziegler, have produced, not from my phones, not from my BlackBerry that I took screenshots from. They took them from subpoenas directly from Apple's iCloud that back up the fact that Hunter knew the big guy was Joe Biden.
The big guy is the brand. The big guy is the lift. The big guy is the one who showed up at golf outings, who took phone calls and meetings and lunches and dinners with Hunter Biden and his business associates. Is that right?
Correct.
And there was a ton of evidence submitted, including this, part of a much longer brief of evidence from Congressman Byron Donalds documenting a transfer of $5 million from China into a Biden bank account.
On August 8th, 4 days later, $5 million is then transferred from the Northern International Capital account of $5 million to Hudson West III. Hudson West III is a bank account controlled by Hunter Biden and Mr. Gong Wang, a.k.a. Kevin Dong, who was a CEFC associate. That money comes from the Northern International Capital bank account that is tied to the CCP. Mr. Chairman, I want to submit for the record the bank statement demonstrating that transfer.
And there was also this amazing meltdown from AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who demanded that Bobulinski name a crime that Biden had committed. And when Bobulinski suggested the infamous RICO racketeering statutes, well, she said, that's not a crime.
Did you watch him steal something?
Corruption statutes, RICO, and conspiracy.
What is the crime, sir?
You
specifically.
You asked me to answer the question. I answered the question.
No.
RICO, you're obviously not familiar with. Corruption statutes.
Excuse me, sir. RICO is not a crime. It is a category. What is the
It's a category of crimes that you're then charged.
You have charges.
A long 100.
You have charges. Sir, please
name the exact statute under RICO.
Yes.
Did you hear that? It's a category of crime. I'll tell you what, I'm going to tell the next cop who pulls me over that speeding is just a category of crime. Seriously. Oh, and for the record, AOC, RICO is a federal law codified at 18 U.S. Code Chapter 96, Sections 1961 to 68. Look it up. But none of any of this stuff that came out really, though, as damning as it is a secret. We know this. It has been hiding in plain sight. And in the past, the media has been willing to report on it cautiously. Here's a sample.
President Biden met with at least 14 of Hunter's business associates while he was vice president.
Then Vice President Joe Biden had dinner with his son Hunter, along with Hunter's business associates from Ukraine, Russia, and Kazakhstan. And the day after the dinner, a Burisma executive sent a note to Hunter, quoting, "Dear Hunter, thank you for inviting me to D.C. and giving an opportunity to meet your father and spend some time together."
Hunter's lucrative business dealings often included giving as much as 50% of his earnings to his dad.
The text read, quote, "I hope you all can do what I did and pay for everything for this entire family for 30 years. It's really hard, but don't worry. Unlike Pop, I won't make you give me half your salary."
His son, Hunter, joining the then vice president on the official visit to Beijing. Unknown to the press back then, Hunter Biden was forming a Chinese private equity fund, planning to raise money, including from Chinese investors. 10 days after the Biden's trip, Shanghai authorities issued the fund's business license.
That was then, but now the stakes are too high. Donald Trump's ahead in the polls, and after surviving his State of the Union, Joe Biden doesn't look to be going anywhere. So they can't have anything like racketeering or subversion of U.S. policy or foreign governments making the news. Remember that time that then Vice President got the Ukrainians to fire the prosecutor who was looking into his son's oil and gas company, Burisma? They can't let that sort of thing get in the way of defeating Trump, who is now struggling to pay the $500 million bond imposed on him by New York Attorney General after New York Attorney General decided to torch the former president on utterly bizarre interpretations of fraud statutes that, again, have seen Trump threatened with the loss of his New York property empire because he, and this is really bad, folks, took out loans and paid them back. Now, remember, in that trial, the banks even testified in his defense, but that didn't matter. The key now for everybody is stop Trump, get Trump by any means necessary. So you look at those two things, and there's two things to say about it. One, it's a bizarre effort because it seems like the more Trump's enemies pursue him through kangaroo court maneuvers, the more his popularity goes up among ordinary Americans whose basic sense of fairness has been offended. But here's the other point, and I think this is the bigger and more important one. You do not have to love Trump. You can hate him, I don't care. And you don't have to loathe Biden either to know that when you look at these two cases and these two scenarios, put them together, and it is no way to run a country or to elect its leader. I've said it before here on this program, and I'll say it again. This is downright banana republic territory that America is sailing into right now. Let's bring in great friend of the show, Sky News' Australia's Washington correspondent, Annalise Nielsen. Annalise, thanks so much for joining me on the U.S. Report. Now, I want to talk to you a bit about this case of Donald Trump and the fraud, and Trump's lawyers requesting a stay of his $454 million fine that he now owes there, saying there are insurmountable difficulties in finding a lender to back that amount. However, we've just learned that New York Attorney General Letitia James's office are now, as a result, making their initial steps to prepare to seize Trump's assets in New York. Annalise, what's the latest on all of this?
Look, the latest is we'll find out Monday, but this is a really serious issue for Donald Trump. This is a huge amount of money. We're talking about almost $500 million. He's tried to, through his lawyers, secure this money to put up on the assumption that at appeal, if he wins, he'll get it back. But in the meantime, the money still has to be paid over into bond. And one of the issues here is the underwriters that his lawyers have approached, they're saying about 30, haven't been able to, according to the responsible lending requirements in the US, approve that significant amount of money. Generally, you can't get a loan like that with property as a collateral because, somewhat ironically, property has some pretty subjective value to it. And generally, you can only get that money back at sale, and it's very subjective what you actually get for a property when you sell it, which goes to the heart of the entire case. And it's part of the issue that this has been such a controversial case. Among all the accusations against Donald Trump, this is one of the more tenuous ones. It seems like it's one of the ones that he's being pursued on more political grounds. And it's one of the ones his supporters, especially we speak to across the country who are planning on voting for him again, point to quite often as being the case where they feel like he's being persecuted, where he's being singled out. Because when you look at this case, the bank didn't have an issue with putting up the money for his properties in the first place, even if he did inflate the values, which he still maintains he didn't. And the issue here is there's no real victim. No one's come forward and said, I lost out X amount because of Y. And so it's a very unusual scenario to be looking at this kind of situation.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure that, many people who are here watching tonight will have gone through the process of getting a second mortgage or refinancing a house. And, they know the banks always do their own due diligence to decide what that property is worth. So, again, if you paid it back, we're not sure where the problem is, especially because the Associated Press has done an analysis where they looked at 70 years of such civil fraud cases, such as this one, and found that it was, quote, according to the AP, the only big business found that was threatened with a shutdown without a showing of obvious victims and major losses. Annalise, does this wind up then, as you suggested before, potentially wind up helping Trump with Americans whose kind of sense of fairness is offended?
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of people don't realize too, in America, everyone pays about 1% of property tax on your property value each year. And the government assesses that each year. So we're all very used to the government telling us how much our property's worth, and it's always worth more than whatever you paid for it because they want to get that money back. This is going to be an issue longer term. Likely what we're going to see on Monday is the court say, look, we're going to put some liens on your property, which is legal right for anyone with a lien. They get the first cut if you sell it, and there'll be further push to say, look, you've got to sort this money out. In the meantime, if you don't, then we can start looking at dissolving properties or seizing them. But this is an extraordinary level. As that AP analysis said, this has happened about 7 times in the analysis of when this law has been in effect, and that's nothing insignificant. But Donald Trump is also suffering in the fundraising stakes. He relies on a lot of grassroots donors. He gets a lot of small donors, but the RNC is supposed to be backing him. They're really struggling to raise money. They've raised about $10 million in February, about $11 million in January, well behind the Biden campaign, which has been shoring up cash by not really campaigning at all or having any primaries. So they are going to be in some dire straits if they can't get that money up soon. And don't forget, he's got a lot of other cases coming to courtrooms this year.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Annalise, to flag the issue of the money, which we should be covering, I think, in the weeks and months to come as we head towards November. But I want to move on to this other phenomenal Donald Trump story. And, of course, that's one that many Australians are following. The interview that he gave with Nigel Farage about Kevin Rudd. And, well, I was just absolutely amazed by this. I wanted to get your opinion. Let's have a little bit of what Donald Trump had to say first for anybody who hasn't quite seen this yet.
I don't know much about him. I heard he was a little bit nasty. I hear he's not the brightest bulb, but I don't know much about him. But if he's at all hostile, he will not be there long.
Now, Annalise, I want to ask you your reaction to this as somebody who covers U.S. politics and somebody who, of course, has dealt with Kevin Rudd. What was your thoughts, and how do you think Kevin Rudd would have reacted to Donald Trump's statements about him there?
Look, you know, when this first broke and the phone started going and started chatting people around DC, I can tell you that very much the sentiment was, well, this was bound to happen at some point, because this was just such an obvious sort of Damocles hanging over the whole situation. I think the calculation that's changed from where they were when they first appointed Kevin Rudd was people weren't as confident that Trump was going to come back. And he has had this pretty miraculous recovery in the political states through the primaries. And right now, up against Joe Biden, he is polling well ahead. And it's especially on the issue of age. So now the calculation that's changed is all of a sudden Trump's a lot more serious than he was. And then I think the other calculation was, well, he's not going to find out about this. We can maneuver this. And Kevin Rudd has been very on the front foot maneuvering with negotiating with Republicans, making a lot of forward steps to be connected to them, but there's only so far you can go back. And I think Phil Khoury wrote a really good piece in the Financial Review basically saying that this was just the fact that it was kind of unedifying behavior for a former prime minister to be putting all this stuff out on social media regardless. And it's still up. These tweets are still up. And it is a very untenable situation. And at the point of a Trump presidency, if that is what comes to pass, this is going to be an issue, because look at it from the other perspective. If we had an ambassador sent to Australia from America who put up that many insulting things about our prime minister, people would be very unhappy about it. And there's only so far transactional politics will carry that. And it's just a liability where we don't need it.
Yeah, and I mean, it is more than just tweets now, too. Sherry Markson, our colleague here at Sky, has surfaced some other vision. Let's have a look at this.
The Republican Party, which enabled this guy to be elected, have a deep responsibility to accept responsibility for the consequence of their actions and begin the processes for one form or another of his removal by constitutional means.
So there he's not just gone after Donald Trump, but he's also gone after the Republican Party. I mean, is his tenureship tenable if Donald Trump wins in November?
And look, these are just going to keep coming up, these excerpts. There's just plenty of examples out there. When we did the interview with Kevin Rudd last year, he said, look, everyone knows that I was at a think tank at the time, and it's a different environment in a think tank. There's so many in Washington, D.C. People come in and out of them. No one's going to take it personally. What this interview proves is it will come back, and people do take it personally. People, especially in politics, are extremely sensitive to these kind of comments. And so I think all this has proved is this is absolutely part of the calculation, and it's always been there. It was waiting to come up.
Annalise Nielsen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, especially for the revelation that there are some people in politics who can be a little bit thin-skinned. We'll see you soon again on the U.S. Report. Joining us now to discuss the crisis at America's southern border is the New York Post Texas reporter, Jennie Taer. Jennie, welcome to the program. We have seen in the last few hours shocking vision of the National Guard in Texas being overrun by migrants rioting to cross the border. Let's have a look at this footage. Jennie, tell us what happened here. This is absolutely shocking. It appears that American authorities are now being overwhelmed by these forces of migrants that are pouring across the border. What happened after this? What's been the reaction? I know Joe Biden's been in the area, I think. Has he had anything to say?
The president has been in Texas, but he has not said anything about this situation. Of course, we know he went to the border recently. But what evolved here is you had a group of about 600 migrants separated by women and children and single adults. The single adults were being moved back to Mexico by Texas authorities, by the National Guard here. And I think what happened was they realized that they were being pushed back. They weren't going to be processed and released as promised by the cartels and human smugglers. And so they decided that rioting would be the best course of action here. They quickly began to encircle National Guard to break through Abbott's border wire, to get all the way up to the gate that Border Patrol typically opens for these large groups to try to get in. And of course, in totally outnumbering National Guard that was here. I mean, it was probably about 200 to 300 single adults that encircled just a few members of the National Guard. This is something that border agents say is their worst fear.
This, Jenny, looks like absolute chaos here. We're just looking again at the vision there. Tell me, this has real potential for tragedy one way or the other, doesn't it?
This is a really, scary situation for the community, for the National Guard here, for the state authorities, for Border Patrol, federal authorities. I think that this is something that is beginning to boil over in El Paso, is we're seeing not only big groups causing riots, but we also saw in the last couple of weeks and in the last couple of years, people that are being released who have criminal histories, who are gang affiliated, who are on the terror watch list. Just a few days ago here, a man who said he was a Hezbollah terrorist was apprehended here and said to health personnel in Border Patrol custody that he was here to make a bomb. That's just one story that we're hearing about. Another story we know about is Jose Ibarra. He came across the border here as well. He's the alleged murderer of Laken Riley.
And I mean, these stories, this story about Laken Riley, of course, made huge national headlines around the world because it got brought up at the State of the Union. But there are cases every single day, tragedies of crimes, terrible crimes being committed by people who crossed illegally and should not be in the country. You got the story about the man who said that he was part of Hezbollah and wanted to make a bomb. At this point, it seems to me like what's happening at the border is not so much about a peaceful group of migrants trying to come through, although some are. But, the word I'm hearing from an awful lot of people on the right is saying this is looking more and more like an invasion than it is a peaceful movement of migrants.
I can tell you I've been covering this for several years now, and there's definitely been a shift in the makeup of people crossing the border. We also reported today that there are people roaming the streets of El Paso with gang tattoos that came from Venezuela. This is the reality. Of course, you do have people, you have the women and children, you have people who are here that are trying to make a case for asylum, but also mixed in with those groups, you have some bad actors, and we're seeing more and more of that.
And what is the reaction? What is the feeling of the Border Patrol agents that you speak to? I mean, are they feeling like they are supported at all by this administration, or are they just feeling like they are being left in what looks like increasingly more and more dangerous situations?
The Border Patrol agents that I talk to are absolutely devastated by this. It has taken a huge toll on not only their morale at work, but in their entire life. It affects their family life. It affects their ability to just do normal things, to sleep without having nightmares, to be able to have normal conversations and be part of normal life, have birthday parties for the kids without thinking about these things. That's the reality. And they go to work every day and they feel complicit in human smuggling. And that's what they tell me. They tell me that they feel like this administration does not have their back. And in a situation like a riot happening, they would be terrified because they especially feel like the president and people in Washington that are in charge of their agency will not support them.
And I mean, we saw this shockingly earlier, I think it was last year, when the Biden administration accused Border Patrol agents of using whips and riding horses to attack migrants, and that turned out to be a completely not true story. But just on Texas, too, I want to ask you, what is the latest with the Supreme Court and their ruling to allow Texas to, imagine this, enforce a law allowing police to arrest migrants suspected of crossing illegally? I mean, it seems like logic to, I think, most viewers, but what does this actually happen? Because it keeps bouncing back and forth between the courts.
Exactly. It feels like whiplash at this point, and we are seeing this bounce back and forth in the courts, which in some ways are saying that the federal government has the power of immigration authority, and that's why Texas Governor Abbott cannot enforce this. And then you have, of course, the Supreme Court going back on that, saying, you know what, go ahead. Well, in the same vein, you had a Fifth Circuit Court hours after this was to go into effect saying, you know what, we're not going to allow this right now. So it really hasn't gone into effect at all here. It doesn't seem to be deterring any people from coming, of course. Maybe it's showing that the confusion is allowing people to come. Maybe they're trying to get in under the wire. It sure seems like there's a renewed surge here with the springtime coming. And so that's kind of the situation here, is that this stands in legal limbo and is allowing migrants to run rampant across the border.
Well, Jenny, thank you so much for bringing us all of this news from the border. We really appreciate it. And I tell you what, looking at the poll numbers showing that Americans now trust Trump by a huge margin to sort this out, I think this is going to be a big issue in the coming election. Jennie Taer, Texas correspondent for the New York Post, appreciate your time, as always, on the U.S. Report. Now, don't go anywhere, because in a moment I'm going to be joined by a politician who just did something extraordinary. He stood up and said that he was there to represent his constituents and not the big money interests. You'll never believe what happened next. But before we go to that, question for you. How is the civility? Let's check in with California Congresswoman Katie Porter, shall we?
Soon, Trump will lose or go to prison or, I don't know, have a heart attack. I'm not sure.
We call it the hamburger.
I don't know what his demise is going to be, but he'll have his demise. And the question will still be there. Who are we as Democrats?
Oh, so polite. Nothing like wishing death on your opponents. You stay classy, San Diego. Adam Morgan after the break. Welcome back to the program. In a moment, I'll be joined by Adam Morgan. But before we go to him, let's have a quick chat about a media meltdown this week that began when Donald Trump went and talked about what would happen to American automaker jobs if the Chinese were able to dump cheap electric vehicles into the U.S. market. Well, he used a phrase. He said that there would be a bloodbath.
And you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. But they're not going to sell those cars.
Now, of course, he was talking about the industry, but you can only guess what happened next. The media went into full panic stations, the sort of thing we haven't seen since 2016 when Trump was accused of calling neo-Nazis very fine people. I could show you a million clips of the lunacy that ensued, but as is so often the case, Joe Scarborough, who is to the Biden White House what Walter Duranty was to Stalin, really led the pack.
He's talking about a bloodbath for America. It's laid out in the terms of it. And these idiots on Twitter, these idiots on cable news, these idiots on Sunday shows going, well, presidents, you know, he was talking only about the auto industry, and this is one more. It's just let me say that at 6:15 a.m. It's just he knew what he was doing. We're not stupid. Americans aren't stupid. He was talking about a bloodbath. Sometimes a bloodbath means a bloodbath. And when he finishes by saying, and that's just going to be the least of it, seriously, these people may be stupid. We're not.
Sorry. This is all insane. And if we've learned anything from nearly a decade, it's coming up on a decade now of Trump hysteria, it is that the greater the anti-Trump lunacy from the left, the more his popularity grows among normal people who see right through the demagogic lies being told by the side of politics that ironically accuses Trump of being the demagogue. All right, got a very special guest for us tonight, a Republican representative from South Carolina, Adam Morgan. Adam, I was very impressed and was very happy to get you here on the program because you made a speech in the South Carolina House the other week that went viral. And I want to play a little bit of this for our viewers. Have a listen to this at home.
Y'all might not know this. A dark money entity that was created on Tuesday, the day after we voted for this, I went home and a attack piece went out in my whole district about the fact that I voted for this. I get that the people in Columbia, that the lobby wants me to either not vote or to vote green on this. But my constituents want me to vote red, and they want their tax money spent on core government functions.
What your suggestion is we should listen to the people back home in your district rather than the people at Commerce that have been successful at bringing these mega deals to South Carolina.
No, I 100% am going to listen to the people back home who I represent in this House. And you should listen to the 40,000 people in your area and not the bureaucrats at Commerce, and not the lobbyists, and not the multi-billion-dollar international corporations. You should listen to your constituents like I am.
Adam Morgan, some incredible straight talk there, blowing the whistle on the political system and how things work in your state, and I suspect Washington. First of all, tell us a little bit of background, and how surprised would people be to know how things really work in the halls of power?
Yeah, I think it went viral because, he said the quiet part out loud that everyone knows most politicians believe, which is the folks back home, the people that we actually represent. Well, the elites think they're too stupid to understand basic economics and how jobs are created. And we know best in government how to spend their money and how to plan their lives and their jobs. And it's just crazy that you hear a representative making that argument. And I was baffled. I mean, you saw my very genuine response of shock and kind of just pushing right back on him. And I think it resonated with a lot of people because we're just fed up with elites thinking that they know best how to run our lives. Government doesn't create jobs. Government planning doesn't work. We need the government to get out of the way and let the American people be great, the Australian people be great. Like, let's trust our people and let them manage their own lives.
And, something you said there at the start of that grab, you talked about how when you came out in opposition to the thing that you were supposed to do and that you were being told to do, some group comes out and starts planting stories about you in the press, essentially. Explain a bit more about sort of how this works, that people have, who are in power don't really have necessarily power. There's people out there who are going to be using dark money and other sorts of mechanisms to try and influence what you do.
Yeah, in this case, we were dealing with a bill that was giving $1.3 billion of tax incentives, $400 million of which was taxpayer cash that we were handing to a private company to come and make electric vehicles in South Carolina. And in my area, every single constituent that reached out to me said, vote no, it's a terrible deal. Electric vehicles are declining. It's not even in our area of the state. Government incentives don't work. You're playing socialism in the private sector. And so I went in and voted no, and we had 2 votes. So I went home, and as you mentioned, a dark money entity was already ready to go, sending out attack texts in my whole district and a social media ad saying that I was anti-job and all these other awful things about me to try to pressure me to flip my vote and vote against the way my constituents wanted me to, and to vote the way these multi-billion-dollar corporations and their lobbyists and House leadership, how they wanted me to. So I simply got at the well and explained why I was voting no. And you just saw the leader of the opposition party jump up and actually make the argument that I, as a representative, should not represent my people or listen to my people because, they're just too stupid. I need to listen to unelected bureaucrats and represent their interests over the people I represent, which is just shocking and everything wrong with politics. And we need more people to stand up to the establishment, to stand up to the swamp, is what we call it over here in the States. And it's very real. You have this kind of uniparty establishment between both parties and between the lobbyists, where they care more about what lobbyist special interests think than the constituents and the interests they represent. And we've just got to break that stranglehold on American politics.
And I hear, am I right that you are now contemplating a move to the big leagues in Washington, D.C., Adam Morgan, for Congress? Is this correct?
Yes, absolutely. I'm running for Congress right now in South Carolina. You can check more about it at voteadammorgan.com. And yeah, I think that we need people who will go into the halls of Congress and fight for the people. That's what's missing in Congress. That's why you have so many people confused about how to vote and where their values lie, because they're looking at who's writing campaign contributions, primarily coming from the lobbyists, and not worried about the people back home, the folks back home, as you heard in the clip. that they have such derision for. And, I bring the voice of the people into the chamber in South Carolina. I fight for my values and my beliefs, and I'm open and transparent and think we need more of that in government. And, we need more debate on issues. We don't need everybody to think the same and act the same and vote the same. We need a robust discussion and questioning how we're spending taxpayer dollars. And it's time for us to actually focus on and care about what the people think and not what unelected bureaucrats and lobbyists think.
Adam, I love it. I love the idea of robust debate in a democracy. Well, I mean, come on, that's crazy talk. Adam Morgan, thank you so much for your time. Good luck. We got a lot of viewers in the U.S. via YouTube, so check him out, and wish you could run for Parliament here in Australia. Adam Morgan. Now it's time for a little segment we like to call Joe versus Reality. In this week's episode, the president gives us a bit of a geography lesson as he starts reeling off major cities in America.
And you had a prescription needed filled, and it was an American company that made it. I'd say, okay, let's fly to Toronto or to Berlin or to London or to Rome or any major city in America. I'll get you that same prescription filled in those cities for 40 to 60% less than it cost you at a pharmacy here.
Yep, Baghdad, Berlin, all those major cities in America. Bit of a trend here among Democrats, by the way. The other day, New York City Mayor Eric Adams was roundly mocked for calling New York City the Port-au-Prince of America. Well, I did hear that they had some good barbecue restaurants, but this is ridiculous. Stephanie Hamill after the break. Welcome back to the program. Pleased now to be joined by Stephanie Hamill, contributing writer at the Media Research Center. Stephanie, thanks so much for coming on the program tonight. And I want to talk about something I touched on earlier, about how the left went nuts and went crazy, taking out of context the story that Trump said there was going to be a bloodbath in the American auto industry if he wasn't reelected. Let's just recap this for a second here.
This was not some meandering off-message comment. Trump's allusions to political violence are not merely rhetorical. His supporters take them literally. That's part of the big problem here.
When the former president, who's already incited violence among his followers, says that there's going to be a bloodbath, he is telling us what he is going to do.
What I heard was a continuation of the same rhetoric, the same endorsement of political violence that we've seen from Donald Trump for years.
And after being hounded for their deceptive coverage of this, our friends at The View still refuse to accept reality.
So no, we're not taking it out of context, because the context is his history and his life.
Now, Stephanie, tell me what your take is on all of this. This is the most unfair beat-up I think they've done in a long time, but what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, James, is that we have an information crisis going on in this country. And ironically, it's coming from those who bang the drum the most about the dangers of misinformation. And what we just saw here was another hoax, just to add to the list of all the hoaxes that have been peddled by the mainstream media in regards to former President Donald Trump. I mean, the list is so long. And what really irritates me is that these people are either very lazy, very dishonest, or they have motives for doing this. I mean, it's very easy to watch the entire clip and understand what's going on there unless you're not very smart. As you pointed out, former President Donald Trump was talking about the auto industry. And really what he was saying was, hey, look, the tariffs are unfair. The U.S. typically gets the short end of the stick when it comes to tariffs. And if I become president again, I'm going to fix that. I'm going to go to bat for the American people and make sure that the deals are fair. And yet somehow, not everyone in the mainstream media, but a lot of people somehow twisted this into how Donald Trump's calling for another January 6th type thing and that he's an insurrectionist. Yet, by the way, he's never actually been charged with, and he was never actually convicted of an insurrection. So, I mean, the lies just keep going on. And you would think that these people who want to be taken seriously would do some self-reflection after getting it wrong so many times over the years, yet they don't. I mean, it's just totally egregious.
And I mean, Stephanie, anybody who lived through and remembered the 2020 mostly peaceful protests will remember a thing or two about the way the left could incite political violence as well. But I want to ask you also about another story here, too, which is about the media arena we all swim in, controlled by the internet and the big tech companies. The Media Research Center's Free Speech America researchers have gone and done, I think, a pretty important piece of work here, exposing 41 times that Google has been caught interfering in U.S. elections. And this has been going on for at least 16 years. Stephanie, tell us about this. It's extraordinary.
That's right. And I'm glad that you brought this up. So the Media Research Center researchers really put together a very interesting and very detailed 16-page report on these instances, as you pointed out, 41 instances of it. And it's kind of what we've talked about before, is that there's algorithms that seem to be in favor of the left. And what this report found is that not only are they typically in favor of the left, but they're in favor of the most liberal candidates. So this goes as far back to 2008. And the researchers are saying that actually Google may have interfered in the 2008 primary between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in support of Barack Obama. And how Google would do this, what researchers found is that they would hide campaign messaging, they would push information into further pages so it wouldn't be the first thing that you would see when you would do the Google search. And so basically it's a manipulation of the algorithm. And they're saying that it's actually escalating and increasing as we go into 2024 in support of Joe Biden. So again, it's not just necessarily against Republicans, it is, but also the liberal candidates who are a threat to the chosen liberal candidate. So, and the big picture here is that this is a threat to democracy, right? You don't want the Google overlords or the people behind the scenes trying to influence how you think and how you vote.
And I mean, this comes down to that whole sort of question that we have with the big tech companies about whether or not they're publishers, and so they have a certain set of rights and obligations, or whether they're more of a public square. And to hear you say it, basically you're saying Google is kind of like a public square, and they are subtly tilting what we hear in it, with potentially shifting, more than 1 or 2 or 3 percentage points of votes one way or the other as they'd like to do. That's pretty scary, isn't it?
It is. And Google has come out and they denied the allegations and claims that were put forth in this report. But again, I am encouraging your audience to go read this report and look at the examples of it. And it is pretty hard to deny. And they're saying that, why would we do this to our audience? We want to be fair to all sides. This is our business model. We want everyone to use Google and do their searches there. But again, you got to see how this is all going on behind the scenes and the examples of it. So, I mean, it's pretty hard to ignore.
Finally, I want to ask you about this story, which I guess in some ways completely unsurprising news. A new study out of Finland has found that woke people are, get this, more unhappy, anxious, and depressed. Now, I don't know about you, Stephanie. I spend a lot of time on social media. I find all the woke people I encounter there to be rays of sunshine who have no personal issues or neuroses. What do you make of this study?
I'm assuming you're being sarcastic, because I usually find them to be the angriest, craziest people online. Very mean too, by the way, the things that they say to me. I mean, if you're fussing around and worrying about pronouns and all of these things, I would say that you're living a very privileged life if that's your biggest concern of the day. But yeah, I mean, these people, I'm not surprised by the findings of this study. Yeah. And my advice to those people who are unhappy is get outside, exercise, eat healthy, start a family, find some hobbies.
Bingo. Couldn't say it better myself. Stephanie Hamill, thank you so much for the Media Research Center. Really appreciate it. Now, don't go anywhere, because Only in America is next. But first, just what is happening with the president? It's looking increasingly like Joe Biden is getting a bit, wandery these days. I mean, just a year ago, the guy who was known as Walkaway Joe simply for his habit of walking out on press conferences. Now he's just wandering around aimlessly while other people are speaking. Have a look at the president in action in Arizona.
Much progress together, but we know that there is still work to be done, which is why we are going to organize like never before and ensure we are turning out the vote. And we know that, there's so much at stake and that Donald Trump continues to pose a threat in so many ways. He continues to spew racist rhetoric.
Over there with the kids. Maybe he thought they had some ice cream. Who knows? Only in America is next. Welcome back to the program. And now it's time for a little segment we like to call Only in America. Well, we're a week past St. Patrick's Day now, and Aaron go bra to all who celebrated. Some of you might have gotten blind drunk. Chicago turned its river green, and in this town in Wisconsin, well, they had a special appearance from the president himself, Joe Biden. Have a look.
I'm Dr. Joe Biden's husband, and I ate Jennie's ice cream, chocolate chip. I came down because I heard there was chocolate chip ice cream.
And let's all remember that being Irish is a very big part of Joe Biden's identity.
My grandfather used to say that being Irish is enough. At any rate, I won't go into that.
Anyway, here's an Irish blessing. May the wind be always at your back, and may you not have a son Hunter who films himself smoking crack. Bye-bye.